Hey everyone, Steven here, and welcome to my little library of horrors. So today's book review is on a book that I happened to just come across one day while I was browsing books online, and the cover really caught my attention because it features a school bus, which is something you really don't see much of in horror or even in general on covers, so it was definitely something that kind of just caught my attention right away, and the art style itself felt kind of campy. Even the title itself is very campy, so I was like, oh, this will probably be like a fun, almost Friday the 13th-esque kind of read, something like Sleepaway Camp or something like that. So I definitely picked it up. And I think just a few weeks ago, I really wanted to just kind of read it, see what it was about, and pretty pleasantly surprised with it. And that book is called Class Trip by Bebe Faas Rice. So Class Trip is the story about a group of teenagers that end up going on a secluded trip to Shadow Island, Vermont, to basically get some extra credit for their high school class. I believe it's their science class, biology possibly, I think. They're basically just trying to get some extra credit. Essentially things go wrong, and the kids start to die one by one in some random ways. And it essentially devolves into this mystery as to who's doing it, who's essentially killing off everybody at the campsite. So it opens up with Angie, our protagonist, kind of giving a basic breakdown of our cast, which consists of very cliche, basically. It's your typical high school cast, with Christabel being the popular mean girl. There's Melanie, who kind of follows her around, is the understudy, who's even meaner than she is. There's Tracy, who is sort of like the sporty girl in the group. She's not really preppy, sort of like I care about my looks and things like that. She's someone who's kind of well balanced, I would say. And then there's, of course, Angie, our protagonist, who's kind of labeled as a nerd. She was always kind of in the smarter kid group until the more popular kids kind of accepted her into her group to kind of help with this group project. So there's that. And then we have our meatheads, Ron and Chip. They're your typical football players, muscle heads. They are dating the popular girls, Christabel and Melanie. Then we have James, who is sort of like the outcast of the group, almost. James basically was someone who spent a year prior in a mental hospital dealing with severe depression and whatnot. And so he's kind of sort of the outcast within the group. And so essentially it opens up with that, and then we get to the kids kind of having pizza, and then a cop shows up and explains to them, that they need to be safe on this trip because an escaped mental patient happens to be wandering that same island because he used to live there. The person's name is Amos Fletcher. And so that's kind of like sort of the catalyst of the mystery starting to set its roots, essentially. And the kids, the next day, they get ready to go, and the teachers that are taking them, the Holmbergs, end up getting sick. They both end up getting really bad diarrhea and vomiting, and they're not able to leave their bed. So the kids convince the grown-ups to let them go to the island themselves. It's a bunch of teenagers that want unsupervised time on a deserted island, essentially. Of course they're going to go, as a teenager, who doesn't want that? So they convince the grown-ups to let them go, and shortly after, that's when things start to kind of unravel there, where the group notices that Chip has been gone a long while after going to get some firewood, and that's where they find him dead. And, after the initial shock sets in, they start to kind of notice things that don't make sense as to how Chip died, where they find this rock covered in blood that's feet away from Chip. You know, they're trying to make it seem like, oh, well, Chip must have slipped and hit his head. But then they're like, well, why was he face down? And why is the rock all the way over here? And da-da-da. So there's a lot of that throughout the story, basically. There's a lot of red herrings thrown your way to kind of lead you away from the trail of who the actual killer is. And it's actually done pretty well, to be honest. I was taken by surprise once the reveal happened. I was kind of like, oh, wow. Definitely didn't see that coming, because the book does, it's interesting because it almost tries too hard to be like, this is the killer, this is the killer, this is the killer, this is who it is. And you're just kind of like, well, okay, I mean, you're shoving it this hard. It's clearly not this person. But at the same time, when it takes the time to explain why it may possibly be this one certain character, I found myself going, okay, that makes sense. Maybe it is this person, even though they're pushing it so hard. But like I said, it walked a very fine line of, is it this person? Is it not this person? So I really love that about the story. I felt the mystery was really well done. The deaths were interesting, honestly. Nothing really gruesome, which is fine. You know, they don't always have to be brutal and disturbing, things like that. A lot of it was, you know, stuff you would find in an Agatha Christie novel, I believe. I've never read any of her stuff, but she does get mentioned quite a bit in the book, so I'm going to go ahead and assume that that was a really big influence of the story. One thing that I noticed as I was reading it, though, is that the book didn't take itself super seriously, but cared enough to give a good mystery behind it. And what I ended up realizing about halfway through is I was like, wow, the prose is really simple. The characters are very cliche, but in a good way, not boring, not like, okay, and let's hurry along kind of thing. And that's when I noticed the book is actually a young adult novel. So I was like, oh, okay, so that makes a lot more sense as to why the characters act the way they act, why we have such a cliche cast, and why the prose is, I don't want to say super simple, you know, it's not sky is blue, trees are green, simple. It's easy to keep the flow going. It's easy for the reader to digest and have us follow along without getting too lost. So, yeah, like I said, I discovered halfway through that it was a young adult novel. And I was always a big R.L. Stine fan when I was younger reading. And as I kind of started to go into my young adult phase, my earlier teenage years, I kind of strayed away from reading in general. Excuse me. And so I kind of missed out on a lot of those, you know, more prominent names in young adult that aren't R.L. Stine. Sort of like, you know, how King is with normal horror, Stine is with young adult. So, you know, I never read Christopher Pike or who's some other... what's her name? Is it C.B. Cooney, I think her name is? I've been seeing that a lot as well. So I kind of missed a lot of those people growing up in my teenage years. So I was really excited to find this and realize that it was young adult, because it was good. Overall, honestly, it was a really good story. I enjoyed it. I thought the characters were interesting. Like, not super grounded, but not complicated. You know what I mean? We do get some character development throughout the story, which was really nice and pretty interesting, again, I think, for a young adult novel, you know, where we see, you know, I don't want to spoil too much. I'll say one person, like Ron, you know, is presented a lot as like the meathead of the group, you know, but we see later on that he isn't so under Christabel's spell to where he won't speak up for himself or tell her when she's being unrealistic or just outright outrageous with her opinions on what's going on. So I think that was really good to add into the story, you know, which is good and interesting because, you know, as you can see, the print's pretty large, you know, so it really does flow well. The pacing's really fast, which is good, you know. let's see. One thing that kind of bothered me, and it's a little bit spoilerish, but not too much, is sort of the whole character of Amos. He's brought up in the beginning as, this escaped convict, and who is crazy and will hurt people and things like that. And he is kind of like this string to kind of, he's sort of like a thread throughout the story, very rarely mentioned, but like as the story goes on, he just kind of gets dropped off and we never hear about him again. So it was kind of like, yes, a red herring, but without like any sort of resolution at the end of it. I felt like it was just kind of like, here's this guy just to throw off the reader for the sake of throwing off the reader. And which I really wish they would have done more with that. Maybe have, as more characters were dying off, maybe have the actual killer leave more clues pointing towards Amos or other people in the group. You know what I mean? It was sort of like, okay, this person's dead. We have no idea how it happened, why it happened, sort of thing. I think that would have been really good for the story to kind of deepen the mystery and further mislead the reader. As I said, I was pretty surprised by the twist and the reveal in the story. Others may not, honestly. I think, I'm not super versed in mysteries, so I think of people who are more into mysteries may kind of see the twist coming before I do. Which kind of leads me into the twist coming is definitely like, I didn't see any foreshadowing coming to it, which doesn't bother me, but I know it can bother some people that, they don't like to be taken completely by surprise. They like to go back and see the clues they missed and things like that. And for me, I'm not great at picking up on foreshadowing, so I personally didn't see any clues that I missed. But again, I think it would have been nice to sort of have some missteps from the killer within the story to kind of, again, further mislead the reader into being, okay, is it this person? Is it this person? Is it possibly this person? I think it kind of almost narrows down your choice too soon. So I really think that would have helped widen the mystery overall. One more gripe I have, I wish the ending was longer. I loved the ending. I thought it was awesome. Like, because it was the reveal twist, and then another twist that was just like, oh, wow, definitely. That's the kind of, like, that part has great foreshadowing in it. I love that. Like, because that I didn't miss. And I was like, oh, that's just awesome. So, but the ending is just really abrupt. And I even if it had been 5 or 6 pages longer, just to tie up a little bit more of the story, especially since the second one isn't a direct sequel, which is a shame. Like I said, I'm still gonna read it. I'm excited to read it, but I really would have loved to see what happens after the big reveal, after the big twist and everything, and like not so much a cliffhanger ending, but like I said, I wanted more. I want more from the ending, which I think is, like I've always said, is a good way to do an ambiguous ending, is leave the reader with the right questions, not the question of what happened, but what's going to happen. And I think this book does that beautifully. Like I said, I love the ending, thought it was great. And then, yeah. So, another thing I was gonna kind of mention, but the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, okay, well, again, it's young adult, so it's like, it almost feels like some of the characters' relationships evolve too fast. There's a scene that happens, and I'm just kind of like, well, wait, where the hell did that come from? I said, that's wicked fast. I'm like, I understand emotions are high and things are crazy right now and everything, but I'm like, that would be sort of like the last thing on my mind in this kind of situation, And especially between these two characters that don't interact too much, no, at least not to the level of as to what ends up happening. So it's like, it took me back a little, but then, like I said, I was like, you know what? It's a young adult novel. People that would have read it brand new at that age, it probably would have made more sense to them. So I decided not to knock anything against it for that. But overall, I gave Class Trip a 4 out of 5. I personally loved it. I think it's a really fun, fast read. If you want a really campy slasher / mystery book that's like, I think it's just over 200 pages. Yeah, it clocks in at about 232 pages. So, but like I said, the print's big on small pages, so even a slow reader like myself knocked it out in about a week. So, definitely recommend checking out Class Trip if you're looking for a really good young adult novel or just a great, fun, quick read overall. Definitely give Class Trip a read. I highly recommend. But that's going to be it for me today, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Feel free to drop a like and leave a comment letting me know your favorite young adult book. I'd love to be able to kind of expand my knowledge on that. You know, that's the whole point of the channel. I'm here to learn too. So, you know, help me help you guys. So, thanks again, everyone. Enjoy your day, and I'll see you later.